Ancient temples and tombs hold more than just spiritual wonders. Many of history's most sacred monuments were deliberately designed to deceive and trap the unwary. Why would builders embed such cunning dangers within places of worship? This video will show you how to spot the hidden traps in sacred architecture, transforming how you see every ancient monument you visit. We will uncover why a serene statue might hide a pressure plate and how a comforting myth could distract from a collapsing floor. You will learn the secret language of stone, where art and illusion merge to protect profound secrets. What do you believe is the true purpose of a sacred space? Your sense of wonder was the first component of the trap. Ancient builders were master psychologists who knew that a person entering a sacred space is not the same as a person walking down a street. Awe opens the mind, but it also makes it vulnerable. In the shadowy quiet of a tomb, surrounded by towering statues and cryptic paintings, your rational mind takes a step back. Your senses are heightened, but your critical thinking is softened by reverence and a touch of fear. This is the precise mental state the architects aimed to create. They designed environments that deliberately triggered a psychological shift, making visitors more likely to accept illusion as reality. Experts like cognitive archaeologist Dr. Elena Petrova explain that ritual spaces dramatically amplify a person's suggestibility. This allowed architectural deceit to function as a subtle form of psychological warfare. The manipulation was far from random. It cleverly leveraged the very myths and religious symbols that people already held in deep reverence or fear. A carving of a protective deity was not just art, it was a warning you were conditioned to obey without question. A mural depicting a comforting creation story could draw your eye away from the almost imperceptible seams in the floor beneath your feet. The trap was hidden not in the strange and unknown, but within the familiar and the sacred. This is why a seemingly benign sculpture might conceal a pressure plate, and a heroic frieze could distract you from the mechanism that would send a stone slab swinging from the ceiling. The true genius of these deceptive monuments lies in this mental interplay. They used your own beliefs and emotions against you, making the deception feel less like a mechanical trick and more like a divine test or a supernatural punishment. This deep understanding of the human psyche is what made these ancient traps so devastatingly effective and why their mysterious allure continues to captivate us centuries later. That disorientation you feel in the maze of identical corridors was a carefully engineered weapon. These misleading pathways did not just confuse, they actively preyed on your most basic instincts for survival. Your brain is hardwired to find patterns, to recognize landmarks, and to trust repetition. Ancient builders turned this very strength into a fatal weakness. In the overwhelming silence of an Egyptian tomb, with every wall bearing the same imposing hieroglyphs and every passage stretching into identical darkness, your sense of direction dissolves. The path that seems most familiar, the corridor that feels like a safe return, could be the one that drops away into a bottomless pit. This was not a mere maze, it was a psychological gauntlet. The architects employed sacred geometry and perfect mathematical ratios not for beauty alone, but to create an environment where logic fails. In the sprawling Hindu temple complexes of Khajuraho, symmetrical hallways were mirror images of each other. One path, blessed by the gods, led worshippers toward spiritual enlightenment and the inner sanctum. Its perfect twin, just inches away, was a facade that gave way to a spike-filled shaft. The iconography was identical, the craftsmanship flawless. There was no visual cue to signal the danger, only hidden knowledge passed down through generations of priests. This transforms a sacred space into a brutal test of faith and intellect, where a single misstep is punished not by chance, but by design. The true treasure was protected not by a locked door, but but by a puzzle that turned your own mind against you. And these deceptions were not confined to static hallways. The very stones you walked upon could be poised to move. That disorienting maze was only the beginning of the deception. The statues themselves were often active participants in the defense of these sacred spaces. Think of the serene stone lions flanking the entrance to a Buddhist temple, their faces frozen in peaceful vigilance. To a worshipper, they were symbols of protection. To an intruder stepping on the wrong stone, they became something else entirely. The entire statue could pivot on a hidden axis, its stone body swinging open to reveal a deadly array of iron blades. This was not magic, but masterful engineering. Ancient artisans integrated simple machinery into their most sacred art, creating automated guardians that appeared completely inert until the precise moment they were needed. Legends from ancient Greece speak of Tolos, a colossal bronze giant who patrolled the shores of Crete, his body heated to a glow to burn any who dared approach. While Tolos may be myth, the principle was very real. Historical records from medieval Europe describe mechanical monks in remote monasteries, intricate figures that could lift a cross, turn their heads, or even emit a low, chanting sound through a system of hidden bellows and pipes. These marvels were powered by the clever application of basic physics. Counterweights dropped silently in hidden shafts, transferring force through a series of levers. Water flowing through concealed channels built up hydraulic pressure, while tightly wound ropes of animal sinew, known as torsion springs, stored immense energy to be released in a sudden, violent motion. The triggers were just as cunning as the mechanisms themselves. A weight-sensitive tile, perfectly disguised among a floor mosaic of lotus flowers, could be the switch. A tripwire, thin as a thread and the same color as the surrounding stone, might be strung across a prayer hall entrance. The psychological impact of these animated statues was arguably more devastating than any physical injury. In a world where people genuinely believed gods inhabited their temples, to see a deity's stone effigy suddenly turn its head and look directly at you was not merely a surprise. It was a divine judgment. The immediate, heart-stopping panic would overwhelm rational thought. A person frozen in terror is far more likely to stumble backward into another trap, or simply stand there, paralyzed, as the stone guardian completed its deadly arc. This fusion of artistry and engineering elevated protection into a terrifying spectacle. It deliberately blurred the line between a miraculous event and a mechanical one, leaving the victim and any witnesses to wonder if they had angered a god or simply triggered a machine. This ingenious manipulation of perception leads us to the most intimate and subtle of all the deceptions, one that targeted not just your mind or your body, but your very soul. The silent judgment of a moving statue was only the prelude to a deeper sensory manipulation. Ancient builders understood that sound could be weaponized just as effectively as stone. Within the echoing chambers of Mayan pyramids, a single spoken word could transform into a chaotic roar. These structures were not just temples, they were finely tuned instruments. Priests knew that chanting specific syllables at a precise pitch would make the entire chamber vibrate, a resonance that could disorient an intruder to the point of physical nausea. This was no accident of architecture. It was a deliberate sonic trap where the very air seemed to turn against you. In some of these pyramids, that resonant frequency was the key. The correct chant, sustained at the right volume, would cause a hidden counterweight to shift, unsealing a door to a sacred inner chamber. The wrong sound, however, could trigger a deadfall of rocks from the ceiling. The architects designed spaces that amplified certain noises while completely muffling others. The faint scuff of your sandal on stone might be swallowed by the cavernous space, while the sound of a single drop of water echoed like a thunderclap, perfectly masking the subtle grinding of a trapdoor opening behind you. This auditory deception created a terrifying dissonance between what you saw and what you heard. Your eyes told you the corridor ahead was clear and short, but the echoes made its true distance impossible to judge, luring you forward into a space that was not what it seemed. This principle was used with chilling creativity across the ancient world. In the vast, deep stepwells of India, builders engineered the acoustics so that the constant drip of groundwater perfectly mimicked the sound of human footsteps. A person hearing this would naturally turn toward what they believed was a companion or a guide, only to be led directly toward a sheer, unguarded drop into the darkness below. High in the Himalayas, remote monasteries were constructed with narrow wind channels carved into the rock. When the mountain winds blew, these channels acted like colossal flutes, producing low, sustained moans and ghostly, whispering voices. These sounds were not dismissed as natural phenomena. They were woven directly into local folklore, presented as the voices of protective or vengeful mountain spirits. This fusion of acoustic engineering and mythology created an invisible barrier of fear, deterring any who might approach without the proper reverence or knowledge. Ethnomusicologists studying these sites have made a remarkable discovery. The sacred chants and rhythmic drumming used in ancient rituals were not arbitrary. They contained specific musical notes and cadences that, when performed in the exact right location, would neutralize these sonic hazards. The resonant frequency that could trigger a collapse was cancelled out by a counter-frequency in the priest's song. The deceptive echoes were overridden by a rhythmic pattern that provided a true acoustic map of the space. This reveals that sound was not merely a defensive weapon, it was a language. Knowing the correct sonic key was as vital as knowing the secret handshake or the hidden lever. It was a form of knowledge that protected the faithful and doomed the unprepared. This layered, multisensory assault on perception made sacred spaces virtually impenetrable. But the architects had one more fundamental element to manipulate in their grand deceptions, one that was available every day yet completely under their control: the interplay of light and shadow. Architects did not just build with stone, they sculpted with sunlight itself. In the sun-drenched temples of ancient Greece, the placement of every window and column was a deliberate calculation. As the sun traveled across the sky, the shadows it cast were not static decorations but dynamic actors in a daily performance. A corridor that appeared safe and open at noon could, by the late afternoon, be crisscrossed with long, dark bars that perfectly obscured the seams of pressure plates in the floor. The shifting light revealed hidden symbols carved into the walls, symbols that pointed the way for initiates while misleading the uninvited. This was architecture in motion, a defense system powered by the cosmos. The most profound examples of this celestial deception are found in Egyptian solar temples. Here, the architects engineered structures that functioned with the precision of a clock. Narrow slots were carved into towering walls, positioned so that on the day of the solstice, a single beam of sunlight would pierce the inner darkness. This beam did not simply illuminate the room, it painted a path. For a few sacred minutes, the light would travel across the floor, highlighting a series of safe stones that led directly to the inner sanctuary. At any other time of day or year, that same aperture would cast a beam in a completely different location, one that pointed toward a section of the floor that was nothing more than a painted illusion over a deep, stone-lined pit. To walk that path without the celestial key was to fall victim to a trap set by the sun god himself. This knowledge transformed the temple from a static building into a living entity, its true nature revealed only to those who understood the dance of the planets. The Maya took this concept even further, integrating it into the very fabric of their cities. Their towering observatories were masterpieces of both timekeeping and security. The stepped pyramids were designed so that on specific dates, like the equinoxes, the interplay of light and shadow would create a distinct pattern, perhaps a serpent of darkness slithering down the staircase. This was a public calendar, but it also held a private, deadly function. A misreading of these shadows, a step taken where the darkness suggested a path that the architecture did not, could lead a person directly to the edge of a concealed cenote, a natural sinkhole hidden by a thin layer of brush and deception. These light-based traps required a deep, generational understanding of astronomy. They embedded cosmic cycles into the stone, ensuring that only the high priests, the keepers of celestial knowledge, could navigate the sacred space safely. The intentional manipulation of shadow did more than protect physical treasures. It guarded esoteric wisdom, making the architecture itself a test of intellectual and spiritual worth. This mastery of illumination finds a perfect partner in the ancient art of reflection. Even the air you breathed in a sacred space could be a carefully crafted lie. Ancient builders mastered the art of olfactory deception, using scent to guide, mislead, or even incapacitate. In the labyrinthine tombs of Etruscan nobles, the air was thick with the smell of decay, a scent deliberately enhanced by placing rotting organic matter in hidden wall niches. This overpowering stench served a dual purpose. It created an atmosphere of death that would repel the superstitious, and it perfectly masked the faint, telltale odor of damp earth rising from a concealed pit trap, a warning sign a potential tomb raider would never detect. The psychological effect was profound. A person gagging from the smell is not paying attention to the subtle give of a stone beneath their feet. This was environmental manipulation at its most insidious. Far from being random, these scent-based traps were precisely engineered. In the subterranean temples of the Moche in Peru, priests burned specific blends of psychoactive plants during rituals. The smoke produced vivid hallucinations, but it also contained compounds that induced dizziness and disorientation. For an initiate, this was a spiritual journey. For an intruder stumbling into the sacred space unannounced, it was a toxic trap that blurred their vision and compromised their balance, making them easy prey for the simplest of pitfalls. The sacred context transformed a biological reaction into a perceived divine punishment. A sudden wave of nausea or a terrifying vision was not interpreted as poisoning, but as the wrath of an angered god. This use of scent as a boundary was widespread. In ancient China, elaborate tombs sometimes featured bronze incense burners designed to release a pleasant, calming fragrance in the antechamber, lulling explorers into a false sense of security. Deeper within, the scent would shift abruptly to something acrid and alarming, a chemical warning signal that they had crossed into a forbidden and lethally trapped section. The air itself became a map, its changing scents a language only the priests could correctly interpret. This layered deception, targeting the most primal of our senses, reveals the totality of the ancient architect's strategy. They weaponized every facet of the human experience, what you saw, what you heard, and even what you smelled, to protect their most profound secrets. The very air within a sealed Mesopotamian ziggurat was a carefully prepared weapon. As you breathed in the faint, sacred fragrance of temple flowers, you were unknowingly inhaling a slow-acting narcotic, a chemical mist designed to cloud your mind and lure you into a stupor. Ancient cultures possessed a profound understanding that smell could directly alter human behavior, and they infused their most sacred spaces with aromas that could either elevate and initiate or utterly destroy an intruder. In the depths of Egyptian tombs, priests burned incense blended with psychoactive resins like frankincense and myrrh. For a sanctioned participant in a ritual, these scents might facilitate a spiritual trance. For a tomb robber, however, the same smoke could induce powerful hallucinations, causing them to see phantom guardians moving in the shadows or lose all sense of direction in a perfectly straight corridor. This was not a supernatural event, it was a deliberate atmospheric manipulation. Far away in the Amazon, tribal shamans protected their shrines using a different kind of olfactory trap. They applied pungent animal pheromones, scents that trigger a deep, instinctive fear of predators. To an uninvited person, the space would feel inherently wrong, charged with a primal terror that screamed at them to flee. These scent-based deterrents were meticulously calibrated. The very same aroma that signaled a divine presence to a faithful priest could induce paralysis or blind panic in a trespasser, turning the air itself into a judge of intention. Modern archaeobotanists have confirmed this practice, identifying the preserved remains of these specific psychoactive and fear-inducing plants in ancient ritual contexts. The evidence is clear: scent was not an afterthought, it was a deliberate and sophisticated component of architectural defense. This subtle use of environmental chemistry highlights the holistic nature of sacred security, where every single human sense was a potential point of entry for deception. This complete sensory control finds its ultimate expression in the silent, mathematical language of the stones themselves, the precise and often misleading patterns of sacred geometry. The mathematical perfection of a Gothic cathedral is itself a grand illusion. Soaring arches and precisely calculated windows create a space of breathtaking harmony, but this sacred geometry was a functional tool for deception. The same ratios that guide a worshipper's eyes toward the heavens were used to engineer dangerous blind spots. A pillar placed according to the golden section might perfectly block the view of a descending stone gate from one specific angle. The vaulted ceilings, designed to amplify chants into a divine chorus, could also distort the sound of an approaching guard's footsteps, rendering them silent until it was too late. This was not mere artistry, it was architectural cryptography. In ancient Greek temples, the revered golden ratio was the key. Builders would construct a chamber with flawless proportions, but a single column base that deviated from this perfect number often marked the location of a hidden lever. Pressing on that specific stone would pivot a seemingly solid wall, revealing a secret passage or, for the unwary, triggering the collapse of the floor beneath them. The deception was woven into the most celebrated principle of beauty itself. This mathematical cunning reached its zenith in the labyrinthine layouts of Hindu temples. These structures were based on intricate mandalas, cosmic diagrams of perfect symmetry. Yet within this perfect order, the architects inserted deliberate flaws, what scholars call asymmetric symmetries. A row of identical carvings might feature one figure with a subtly different hand gesture. A pattern of floor tiles might repeat perfectly, except for one seemingly minor misalignment. To an initiate, these were signposts. To an intruder, they were a siren's call. Following the flawed symmetry would lead a person directly into a dead-end corridor designed to seal shut behind them, or onto a section of roof engineered to collapse under a specific weight. The builders of these spaces possessed a form of knowledge that was both spiritual and intensely practical. They were not just masons, they were cryptographers who wrote their secrets not in ink, but in stone and proportion. The sublime beauty of the space was the ultimate disguise, disarming suspicion with its elegance and making the very idea of hidden danger feel blasphemous. This reliance on mathematical deceit reveals a startling truth. The most secure treasures were not protected by brute force, but by intellectual superiority. The stone itself, however, could be the final and most literal layer of the trap. That cool, polished marble beneath your fingers is the final and most intimate lie. In the grand mausoleums of Rome, a visitor might reach out to touch a wall of what appears to be solid, veined marble, a testament to wealth and permanence. But under the slightest pressure, the surface gives way, cracking to reveal itself as nothing more than skillfully painted plaster, a fragile shell hiding a spike-filled pit beneath. This was the art of material substitution, a deception that targeted the most fundamental human instinct, to trust what we can feel with our own hands. Builders throughout the ancient world became masters of this superficial glamour, using it to mask the dangerously fragile truth of their structures. In the humid jungles of Southeast Asia, the great wooden beams supporting a temple roof might be partially rotted from within. Artisans would then apply a thin, perfectly matched veneer of healthy wood, creating the illusion of a solid framework. An intruder climbing across these beams, convinced of their strength by the flawless exterior, would be sent crashing through as the rotted core finally gave way. The desire for a hidden vantage point or a cache of treasure was exploited by a simple understanding of structural weakness disguised as strength. This trickery reached its most tempting form in the high Andean shrines of ancient South America. Here, craftsmen would apply delicate sheets of gold leaf to idols carved from soft, brittle sandstone. To a greedy eye, this appeared to be a solid golden statue, an incredible prize. But the moment it was pried from its pedestal, the brittle stone core would fracture, shattering the golden shell and rendering the treasure worthless, often triggering a cave-in or deadfall in the process. This was a psychological trap of the highest order, weaponizing human avarice. The very longing that drove a person to seek the treasure also guaranteed their failure, turning their prize into their punishment. Modern conservators working on these monuments have uncovered the evidence of this widespread practice. Beneath layers of ornate, glamorous exterior finishes, they find the true building materials cheap, weak, or deliberately compromised. The story told by the underlying stone and wood is one of cunning and anticipation, a narrative completely at odds with the splendid face presented to the world. This relentless focus on substance over appearance reveals the architect's profound grasp of human temptation. They knew that a person driven by greed would overlook the possibility of a trap hidden not in the dark, but in plain sight, disguised as the very object of their desire. This manipulation of physical reality finds a perfect parallel in the ancient world's use of a more abstract deception, one written not in stone but in symbol and story. A saint's blessing could also be a death sentence. That serene fresco in a Byzantine church, depicting a holy figure with a hand raised in benediction, holds a second, secret meaning. If you were to mentally reverse the image, the saint's gesture transforms, its lines now pointing unerringly toward a specific stone in the wall, a concealed lever that opens a trapdoor beneath the unwary. This is symbolic reversal, a masterstroke of sacred deception where the art itself becomes a locked door, and its true interpretation is the only key. The builders and high priest shared a visual language that operated on two levels, one for the faithful masses and another, more dangerous truth for those who guarded the temple's deepest secrets. In the grand Aztec temples, this principle was carved in stone. Certain glyphs, when viewed from the front during a public ceremony, depicted benevolent gods offering sustenance and life. But from a side angle, accessible only to initiates moving through restricted corridors, the same carving resolved into the snarling visage of a death god, its form deliberately constructed to signal the presence of a pressure trap or a concealed pit ahead. The image was a perfect visual cipher, its meaning flipping based on your position and, by extension, your authority. This duality was a global phenomenon. Norse runestones, often seen as mere memorials, sometimes embedded dire warnings within their intricate decorative patterns. A series of interlocking knots might appear to be a celebration of unity and strength, but a person literate in the esoteric meanings of the symbols would see the pattern break in one specific curve, an intentional flaw that encoded an alert about unstable ground ahead or a hidden company of defenders lying in wait. To miss this subtle cue was to walk blindly into an ambush. This layered symbolism made cultural and religious literacy a matter of life and death. Knowing the myths and the iconography was not an academic exercise, it was a practical survival skill. The art on the walls was a map, and misreading it had immediate physical consequences. This reveals the ultimate fusion of form and function, where spiritual expression and pragmatic security were one and the same. The beautiful facade of devotion concealed a brutal, efficient security system that judged intruders based on their knowledge. But knowing the symbols was only half the key to survival. The other half was knowing the precise sequence of actions that rendered these deadly mechanisms harmless. The correct prayer was not a plea, but a key. In the torch-lit halls of the Eleusinian mysteries, an initiate's survival depended on a precise sequence of devotion. They were required to pour ceremonial libations into a series of stone basins. To an observer, this was a profound religious act. In reality, each basin was a carefully calibrated counterweight. Pouring the wine in the exact, prescribed order caused the weights to shift in a silent chain reaction below the floor, withdrawing the bolts that held a collapsible bridge in place over a chasm. One misstep in the ritual, one libation poured out of turn, and the bridge would remain locked or worse, release its supports entirely. This was the ultimate fusion of faith and function, where the ceremony itself became a living disarmament code. High in the Himalayas, the same principle was at work. In certain Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, reaching the inner sanctum required a specific clockwise path around a central statue. This circumambulation was a core tenet of Buddhist practice, a meditative act of respect. But here, it also served a starkly practical purpose. The true, safe path was a narrow track of stone that would not trigger the pressure plates embedded in the surrounding floor. Straying from this sacred circuit, even by a single step, could release a volley of arrows from hidden slots in the walls. The ritual was the map. These performances embedded safety directly into tradition, ensuring that only those instructed by a master, those who had memorized the sacred choreography, could proceed without being harmed. Anthropologists studying these sites realized that the rituals were more than just ceremony. They were a sophisticated method of knowledge preservation. The specific order of prayers, the exact number of circumambulations, the precise locations for offerings, these were not arbitrary rules. They were a verbal and physical blueprint for navigating the deadly architecture, passed down through generations without ever committing the secret of the traps to a vulnerable scroll or diagram. The knowledge lived in the performance. This integration shows that for ancient cultures, protection was not a separate concern from spirituality. It was woven into its very fabric. A person who did not understand the deep meaning of the ritual was by definition unworthy to enter the most sacred spaces. This elegant system of ritual as a key reveals a world where belief and mechanics were inseparable partners in guarding the profound. That same partnership extended to the world outside the temple walls, where architects learned to weave their deceptions from the very fabric of the natural landscape. The sacred pool was a liquid labyrinth. In Mesopotamian temples, a series of stepping stones invited you to cross a placid expanse of water, a ritual of purification before entering the inner sanctum. But the true, safe path was not the one you saw above the surface. The correct stones were deliberately submerged just an inch below the waterline, becoming visible only when oil lamps were held at a precise, ritualistic angle, their light refracting through the water to illuminate the safe route. Any other path led onto stones that were counterweighted to tilt and plunge the walker into a submerged channel, sweeping them away into an underground cistern. Water was not merely a spiritual symbol, it was a versatile and merciless component in the architect's arsenal. Roman engineers perfected this deception in their underground mithraeums, temples dedicated to the god Mithras. Here, they constructed intricate hydraulic networks that channeled underground streams. Taking a wrong turn in the torchlit crypt would trigger a counterweight, releasing a rush of water that would silently and swiftly fill the chamber behind you, cutting off your retreat and forcing you deeper into the trapped complex. In Southeast Asia, the wide, serene moats surrounding temples like Angkor Wat were far more than decorative. They contained massive, submerged wooden gates that could be pivoted by guards from hidden chambers on the bank. A swimmer attempting a clandestine approach would find themselves effortlessly redirected by the hidden current, funneled away from the temple walls and into a confined, cage-like space where they could be easily captured. The spiritual significance of water as a purifying, transitional element made these traps uniquely insidious. A visitor participating in a ritual cleansing would never suspect that the very medium of their devotion was also the mechanism of their potential demise. They assumed safety in the sacred. Modern archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating sonar have confirmed these ancient engineering marvels, revealing the sunken sluice gates and carved stone channels that controlled the flow. These findings corroborate ancient texts that spoke of liquid guardians, spirits of the water that defended holy sites. This mastery over hydraulics shows that ancient builders did not just work against the environment, they weaponized it, turning rivers and rain into active partners in protection. This fluid deception finds its stark opposite in the most solid and unyielding of elements, the earth itself. That pivoting stone door in the cliff dwelling is a perfect lie because it asks you to believe your own eyes. You see a natural crack in the mountain, a random product of wind and time. The builders, however, saw a ready-made hinge. They would identify a massive, precariously balanced boulder and spend years patiently carving its base, reducing the point of contact until it could swing with a gentle push, all while its weathered exterior remained indistinguishable from the surrounding cliff face. This was geological manipulation, the art of turning the landscape itself into a sentry. In the surreal, cone-studded valleys of Cappadocia, this practice reached an astonishing scale. Entire underground cities were carved from soft volcanic tuff, and the architects added their own deadly features to the natural caverns. They would carve false stalactites, hanging stone daggers that appeared to be millennia-old mineral deposits. But these were connected by thin, cured leather cords to pressure plates on the floor. A single step in the wrong place would sever the cord, sending the heavy stone spike plunging downward. The evidence of the trap, the broken cord and the fallen stone, would look exactly like a simple, unfortunate rockfall, leaving no trace of the designer's hand. High in the Himalayas, the same principle was applied to ice and snow. Monks guarding remote sanctuaries knew the precise routes across glacial fields. They would identify snow bridges over deep crevices that were strong enough to hold a person who stepped lightly in a specific, practiced pattern. An uninvited follower, stepping with a different weight or rhythm, would break through the fragile crystalline structure and vanish into the abyss below. The environment itself executed the sentence, with the architects merely setting the stage. Geologists working alongside archaeologists have only recently begun to identify these subtle modifications. They use laser scanning and core sampling to distinguish between a naturally weathered rock face and one that has been meticulously abraded to create a pivot point, or between a genuine stalactite and one that was carved and then artificially aged with mineral solutions. This research reveals a global pattern of environmental engineering, a silent collaboration between human cunning and the raw power of the earth. The sheer sustainability of these traps is what made them so profoundly effective. They required no metal that could rust, no ropes that could rot. They were maintained by the same forces that created them, by wind, water, and freezing temperatures. A mechanical trap in a pyramid might fail after a few centuries, but a pivoting stone door, balanced by the mountain itself, remains ready for millennia, waiting for the one person who does not know the mountain's secret. This mastery over the very substance of the world leads to the final, most elusive layer of the grand deception, one that manipulated a force even more relentless than stone, the unstoppable flow of time itself. The very stones themselves were designed to remember time. A Celtic stone circle stands silent and imposing under the weak winter sun, its long shadows stretching like dark fingers across the frosty ground, pointing the way toward safe passage between the monoliths. But return in the height of summer when the sun rides high in the sky and the shadows shrink and pivot, now aligning perfectly with the locations of concealed pits and unstable ground. The monument had not changed, but its relationship with the cosmos had, and with that shift, its entire defensive purpose was rewritten. This was the ultimate architectural deception, one that weaponized the passage of days, seasons, and years. Ancient builders encoded time itself into their structures, creating traps that were dormant for months, only to awaken with lethal intent on a specific date. In Egypt, towering obelisks were far more than tributes to pharaohs. They were colossal sundials. The moving shadow cast by the stone needle was not just a clock, it was an active trigger. As the shadow swept across the temple plaza, it would interact with different markers throughout the day. A shadow touching a specific carving at noon might pivot a hidden door, while the same shadow reaching a different stone at dusk could release a counterweight that dropped a massive gate, sealing an intruder inside a courtyard. The safe path through the sacred precinct was not a fixed route, it was a schedule. This principle was perfected in Mesoamerica, where the grand ball courts were acoustic marvels. The vast, sloping walls and stone rings were engineered so that the sound of a rubber ball striking the court would echo in a unique way only during the equinoxes. On those 2 days a year, the precise angle of the sunlight and the atmospheric conditions transformed the chaotic noise of the game into a coherent sonic map. The echoes would bounce from specific points, subtly highlighting the location of hidden escape hatches or secret chambers within the walls. An intruder exploring the empty court on any other day would hear only confusing reverberations, completely missing the auditory clues that could save their life. These temporal deceptions created a security system that was fundamentally dynamic. An explorer could spend weeks meticulously mapping a temple, believing they had unlocked all its secrets, only to return under a different phase of the moon or in another season and find the entire layout transformed into a death trap. The knowledge required to survive was not a static map, but a living understanding of celestial cycles. This sacred chronology was meticulously preserved in complex calendrical systems and astrological texts, binding the measurement of time directly to physical survival. This chronological dimension introduced a staggering concept: layered defenses that shifted not with a key, but with the movement of the planets. It reveals a final, breathtaking truth about these sacred spaces. They were not just built to last, they were built to change, ensuring their secrets remained protected by the most relentless and unpredictable guardian of all, time itself. Surviving the first trap was merely the first step in a longer, more terrifying ritual. The true genius of these sacred defenses lay in their layered nature, a series of interlocking deceptions designed to exhaust your mind and ensure your eventual failure. Imagine you have just navigated a false corridor, your heart still pounding from the near miss. You enter the next chamber, a room with a breathtaking mosaic floor depicting a clear moral choice: the path of the blessed and the way of the sinful. Your instinct, your very conditioning, tells you to walk upon the holy symbols, but in this room that ingrained knowledge is your death warrant. Stepping on the blessed images triggers a volley of darts from the walls, while the only safe path is to tread directly upon the faces of the damned. This was psychological warfare of the highest order, turning your own faith and morality against you in a single, brutal test. The architects did not just build one trap, they built entire sequences. In the tombs of the pharaohs, a clever invader might use a reflected sliver of light to bypass an initial pit, only to have that same beam of light guide them directly into a chamber engineered with acoustic trickery. Here, the sound of their own celebrating footsteps would mask the subtle grinding of counterweights, signaling a ceiling poised to collapse upon them. Each solved puzzle led not to safety, but to a more complex and insidious challenge. Byzantine crypts took this layering to a different extreme, combining scent-based disorientation with geometric misdirection. A trespasser would first be confronted by an overwhelming, hallucinogenic fog of incense, blurring their vision and cloud their thoughts. Then, in their confused state, they would face a hallway that appeared perfectly straight to the naked eye, but was in fact a masterwork of forced perspective, its converging lines funneling them toward a single, unavoidable pressure plate. The initial trap softened the mind, and the second delivered the final blow. Analysis of these sites reveals a chillingly consistent pattern of escalation. The first hazards a person encountered were often straightforward, a simple pit or a falling block, but each successive layer incorporated more elements, blending visual illusions with sonic misdirection or olfactory weapons with mathematical deceit. This strategic stacking was not haphazard. It was a deliberate tactical plan, a gauntlet meant to wear down an intruder's concentration until a single, fatal error became inevitable. The sacred space was not merely protected, it was orchestrated like a lethal symphony, with each movement building upon the last. This intricate stacking of physical hazards finds a direct parallel in the way these cultures built their defenses from the very fabric of their own myths and legends. That ominous inscription warning of a god's curse was itself the trap. In a Mayan temple, you might find a chamber sealed by a stone slab covered in vivid hieroglyphs, describing in terrifying detail the wrath of the rain god Chok should anyone dare to break his seal. Your entire focus, your fear, and your curiosity become locked on that single, dramatic point of entry. You gather your tools, you brace for a supernatural confrontation, and you force the stone open, completely unaware that the true mechanism was triggered the moment you started reading. The vibration of your voice echoing in the confined space, or the simple act of brushing away dust from the inscription, could have been the trigger. The real danger was never behind the cursed door, but in the seemingly mundane, unadorned room right next to it, which suddenly seals shut or floods with water. This is cultural misdirection, a psychological gambit where the most prominent and frightening legends were used as bait to divert attention from the actual, mechanical threats. The builders weaponized the very stories that defined their society. At a Norse burial site, the entrance might be dominated by a massive, intricately carved serpent, its coiled body and gaping maw promising a mythical guardian. Any intruder would fixate on this beast, expecting a complex mechanism tied to the carving itself. They would prod the stone serpent's eyes, try to pivot its fangs, or avoid touching it altogether, all while stepping blithely past it into a simple, tripwire-activated weighted net that dropped from the ceiling. The grandeur of the myth concealed the brutal efficiency of the physics. In Indian temple complexes, this principle was perfected through the use of divine guardians. Elaborate oral traditions and carved friezes would tell and retell the story of a specific deity who protected the temple's heart, their stone effigy standing watch in a central hall. Visitors, conditioned by generations of storytelling, would approach the statue with a mixture of reverence and wariness, their eyes scanning the idol for any sign of movement or hidden seams. Their attention was completely absorbed by the figure, making them careless of the floor beneath their feet, which was a complex grid of pressure-sensitive tiles. The true guardian was not the statue but the story attached to it. This psychological leveraging of cultural beliefs made the deception self-perpetuating. Each generation, in passing down the dramatic myths of cursed chambers and animated statues, was unknowingly reinforcing the security system. They were teaching their children exactly where to look for danger, thereby ensuring that the real, unglamorous mechanisms would remain overlooked. Ethnographers studying these oral traditions have found a startling correlation. The most vivid and frequently recounted myth cycles in a culture almost always align with the most prominent and visually striking architectural features, the very ones designed to misdirect. The story of a dragon did not describe a trap, it became the trap, a narrative component as integral to the defense as a stone block or a counterweight. This cultural layer reveals that the architects were not just engineers, they were master storytellers who understood that the most secure lock is one that exists in the mind. This sophisticated manipulation of belief and narrative forces us to confront a difficult question. Where do we draw the line between clever protection and cruel deception? The same hands that offered blessings also calibrated death. Behind the serene rituals and sacred chants, the priests and architects who designed these lethal systems faced a profound moral conflict. How could a space dedicated to compassion, enlightenment, and divine connection be intentionally filled with mechanisms meant to maim and kill? This is the central, unsettling paradox of the sacred trap, forcing us to question the very nature of protection within a spiritual context. Theological scholars are deeply divided on this issue. One perspective argues that embedding such violence was a fundamental perversion of the temple's purpose, a descent into a brutal, human desire for control that betrayed any message of divine mercy. The other contends it was a necessary, even sacred, duty. In this view, the most profound mysteries required the most absolute defense. A desecrated temple was a spiritual catastrophe, and preventing that justified severe measures. The variation in how different cultures resolved this dilemma is stark and revealing. In certain Buddhist monasteries, the principle of ahimsa, or non-harm, directly influenced defensive design. Traps were engineered to capture, disorient, or imprison an intruder rather than take a life. A hidden net might drop from a ceiling, or a pivoting wall might seal a person in a chamber with air and water until they could be judged. The goal was to neutralize a threat without violating the core tenet of compassion. This stands in sharp contrast to the defenses in an Egyptian tomb. There, the ethical framework was completely different. The tomb was not just a building, it was a vessel for the soul's journey to the afterlife. Any intrusion threatened eternal damnation for the pharaoh. In this context, a collapsing ceiling or a volley of poisoned darts was not seen as murder, but as a form of divine justice and a necessary protection of cosmic order. The lethal force was justified by the stakes, which were nothing less than immortality itself. This spectrum of lethality, from non-harm to certain death, shows that a culture's practical security decisions were deeply shaped by its most cherished religious values. The trap was not just a physical object, it was a theological statement carved in stone. Understanding this moral complexity is essential. It prevents us from viewing these ancient builders as merely cruel or paranoid. They were custodians navigating an impossible choice, weighing the sanctity of a place against the sanctity of a life. Their solutions tell us just as much about their beliefs as their scriptures do. This ancient ethical struggle over sacred security finds a powerful and unsettling echo in the modern world. Laser light now traces the ghosts of these ancient deceptions. In the dense jungles of Cambodia, archaeologists sweep LiDAR scanners over crumbling temple complexes, their instruments revealing subtle depressions and hollow channels in the stone that are completely invisible to the naked eye. These scans have uncovered the truth behind legends of temples that defended themselves, pinpointing the precise locations of long-dormant counterweight systems. A massive stone block, once thought to be a simple lintel, is shown to be suspended above a hidden pivot, its mechanism connected by a network of carved channels that directed rainwater to fill a hidden counterweight bucket. When the bucket was full, the weight would shift and the block would swing shut with terrifying force. This was not magic, it was hydraulics, an engineering masterpiece that modern visitors walking the same path would never suspect. The scientific rediscovery of sacred traps is fundamentally rewriting history. Ground-penetrating radar used in Mediterranean necropolises has mapped entire hidden chambers that remain physically inaccessible. These spaces only align with the main tomb's entrance when specific, solitary obelisks outside the complex are cast in shadow at the exact moment of sunset on the equinox. The architecture was a celestial time lock, and we are only now learning to read the clock. Similarly, in the high Andes, sophisticated acoustic analysis has mapped sonic frequencies within ancient shrines. What local oral history described as the mountain spirits crying out in warning has been identified as a deliberate, sound-focused trap. Certain corridors were shaped to amplify the wind into a deafening shriek at a specific resonant frequency, a noise designed to disorient and panic anyone inside, likely driving them toward a concealed precipice. These technological validations force us to take historical accounts of booby-trapped monuments seriously, no longer dismissing them as mere travelers' tales or superstition. They reveal a staggering level of ancient technological capability, where intuition and raw material mastery achieved results we once thought required modern science. This new understanding, however, creates a profound ethical dilemma for conservators. When a team identifies a fully intact, still-armed trap within a site open to the public, what is their responsibility? Do they preserve the mechanism in its lethal, original state, respecting the builder's intent and the monument's historical integrity? Or do they carefully disarm it, prioritizing the safety of thousands of visitors and the workers who maintain the site? This is not a theoretical question. It is an ongoing, difficult dialogue at archaeological sites across the globe, a constant balancing act between discovery and conservation. The choice we make shapes how future generations will physically interact with these spaces. By viewing these sacred monuments through a scientific lens, we gain a humbling new appreciation for the ingenuity embedded in their stones, an intelligence that waited silently for centuries to be understood once more. A conservator's hand hesitates over a stone panel in a Thai temple, a 1,000-year-old mechanism poised just beneath its surface. This is the modern dilemma of preservation, a silent conflict between honoring history and protecting human life. The team knows that a single misstep during restoration could trigger a volley of iron darts, a perfectly preserved but horrifyingly functional piece of the past. To reinforce the ancient trap is to maintain a lethal artifact in a public space. To safely dismantle it is to erase the very ingenuity that makes the site so remarkable. International bodies like UNESCO provide guidelines, but these often fall into a gray area when the danger is a core part of the monument's identity. Is a temple truly authentic if its most cunning defensive features have been neutered for modern convenience? The solution in some locations has been a form of architectural duplication. For certain royal tombs in Egypt, exact replicas have been constructed nearby, complete with every carving and corridor, but with all traps permanently disabled. Tourists experience the grandeur and the illusion of danger, while the original, armed site remains sealed and untouched. This approach, however, is phenomenally expensive and impractical for the thousands of lesser-known sacred sites scattered across the globe. The ethical weight of this decision is felt most acutely when working alongside indigenous communities. For some cultures, disarming an ancestral trap is not a technical choice, but a spiritual transgression. It is seen as disregarding the explicit will of their forebears, who intended these mechanisms to stand guard in perpetuity. To remove the threat is to disrespect the sacred duty of protection entrusted to them. These ongoing debates reveal that these monuments are not static relics. They are living conversations between the intentions of the dead and the responsibilities of the living, forcing us to continually redefine what it truly means to preserve a sacred space. This tangible struggle with physical traps leads to a more abstract question. What if the greatest deception was not in the stone, but in the symbolism we have misunderstood for centuries? Perhaps the most profound trap was the one you carried inside your own mind. The intricate, deadly mechanisms we have explored may have had a parallel purpose, one that was not about protecting gold or jewels, but about guiding a soul. Some scholars, like the mythologist Joseph Campbell, propose that the legendary deceptions were not merely physical. They were spiritual tests, allegorical representations of the inner obstacles one must overcome on the path to enlightenment. In this light, a temple's layout transforms from a security schematic into a map of consciousness. A seemingly endless corridor that doubles back on itself is no longer a navigational puzzle, but a symbol of a flawed philosophical path, a cycle of mistaken beliefs from which one must break free. The single, hidden safe passage through a field of pressure plates is not just a secret route, it is the narrow way of correct understanding and disciplined thought. The legendary moving statues in the labyrinth of Crete, for instance, might symbolize the shifting fears and illusions that arise in the psyche when one ventures into the unknown territory of the self. Their threat was not just to the body but to the resolve of the seeker. This interpretive layer does not dismiss the reality of physical traps, but rather adds a breathtaking depth to their function. It suggests the ancient architects were working on multiple symbolic levels at once, building structures that challenge the body while simultaneously instructing the spirit. Supporting this view, we find certain mechanisms that appear too theatrically elaborate or mechanically improbable to have been practical defenses. A collapsing ceiling triggered by a specific musical note, for example, seems less like an efficient security measure and more like a powerful ritual demonstration, a dramatic representation of the consequences of spiritual ignorance. The trap becomes a piece of sacred theater, a physical parable meant to leave a permanent impression on the initiate. This elegant blending of the literal and the metaphorical enriches our appreciation of these spaces as truly multidimensional creations. They were fortresses for treasure and sanctuaries for the soul, their stones imbued with meanings that resonate across the centuries. This symbolic approach to sacred architecture invites a fascinating comparison, revealing that the same core ideas about spiritual tests manifested in remarkably similar ways across the entire ancient world. The impulse to weave deception into sacred architecture is a thread connecting humanity across continents and centuries. In the misty mountains of Japan, shinobi monks designed temples with floors that sang, creating specific notes when stepped upon in the correct sequence, a melodic key for initiates. A wrong step produced a dissonant creak, alerting hidden guards. An ocean away, high in the Andes, Incan priests built mountaintop shrines where the only entrance was a narrow stone bridge that retracted into the cliff face, operated by a counterweight system startlingly similar to mechanisms found in the dungeons of medieval European castles. These cultures had no contact, yet they arrived at nearly identical solutions for protecting their most holy sites. The most common parallel is the false floor, a simple yet devastatingly effective concept. In the crypts beneath Gothic cathedrals, a section of the tiled floor might be a painted canvas stretched over a pit, perfectly mimicking the surrounding stone. In the heart of a Mesoamerican pyramid, builders constructed a floor of thin limestone slabs that would crack under the weight of an intruder, dropping them into a chamber below. The universal fear of falling, of the ground giving way, was a psychological trigger builders instinctively knew to exploit. The manipulation of light reveals another global pattern. Egyptian solar temples used precisely angled shafts to illuminate a safe path only on the solstice. Centuries later and half a world away, Polynesian navigators building sacred mari structures on remote islands oriented them so the rising sun on the equinox would cast a spear of light through a ring of stones, pointing directly to a hidden freshwater spring or a concealed cave entrance. This shared use of celestial alignment suggests a common understanding that true safety was not just a physical path, but a path in harmony with the cosmos. Despite these profound similarities, cultural priorities created distinct variations. Societies with a focus on deterrence, like the Egyptians, often employed dramatic, immediately lethal traps such as collapsing ceilings or volleys of darts. In contrast, cultures valuing capture or spiritual testing, like certain Buddhist sects in Tibet or the Olmecs in ancient Mexico, favored subtle, delaying mechanisms. These included doors that sealed silently behind an intruder, labyrinthine corridors that led in circles to exhaust them, or hallucinogenic smokes that induced confusion without causing permanent harm. The goal was not just to stop a violation, but to demonstrate the futility of the effort or to provide a lesson. This global tapestry of sacred security reveals a fundamental truth. The desire to protect what is most sacred through cunning and illusion is not an anomaly of a single culture, but a widespread human response. It speaks to a universal intuition that the greatest treasures require the most sophisticated defenses, and that the mind itself is the most fertile ground for sowing those defenses. These recurring patterns in stone and shadow find their echo in the stories passed down through generations, where the line between historical mechanism and legendary guardian begins to blur. The tomb of China's first emperor is said to be defended by crossbows that fire automatically for eternity, a legendary trap born from the pages of an ancient historian. These stories, repeated for centuries, depict rivers of shimmering, toxic mercury and an entire subterranean kingdom guarded by mechanical sentinels. While archaeologists have indeed detected unusually high levels of mercury in the soil around the unexcavated tomb, suggesting a kernel of truth, the legend has grown into something far grander. The self-shooting arrows have become an unstoppable, supernatural army in the popular imagination. This process of mythological amplification is not unique to China. In Hindu temple lore, you hear of the never-ending staircase, a flight of steps that a person can descend forever without ever reaching the bottom. Is this a description of a clever optical illusion built into the stone, or a purely spiritual metaphor for a cycle of endless rebirth? The line between a real architectural trick and a powerful allegory is intentionally blurred. These stories served a vital, practical function beyond mere entertainment. A detailed, terrifying legend about a cursed tomb or a temple protected by gods was in itself a powerful deterrent. Why risk your life and soul to rob a place everyone knows is watched over by vengeful spirits or automated archers? The narrative became a cost-free, self-perpetuating security system, passed down through generations to keep the curious at bay. Folklorists track how these trap legends evolve, absorbing local color like a sponge. A simple pit trap in one region's story might, over time, become the lair of a serpent demon from a popular local myth. A collapsing ceiling in another tale could be recast as the crushing hand of an angered deity. The physical danger of the mechanism was amplified by a cultural fear of the monstrous or the divine, making the warning far more potent. This strategic fusion of fact and fiction reveals a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. A potential looter might be brave enough to challenge a stone door, but would they dare challenge a god? The legend acted as a psychological perimeter wall, far more imposing than any physical barrier. Today, these amplified legends continue to shape our culture, inspiring everything from blockbuster films to video games, proving that the most enduring traps are not made of stone, but of story. The spinning blades and collapsing floors of an Indiana Jones film feel like pure fantasy, yet they are rooted in a historical reality we have been exploring. Hollywood did not invent the booby-trapped temple, it simply polished the ancient concept for the silver screen. These cinematic adventures, along with blockbuster video games like Tomb Raider and mystery novels like The Da Vinci Code, have become the primary way modern audiences encounter the idea of sacred deceptions. They take the genuine principles of psychological and mechanical traps and amplify them into a spectacle of dramatic escape and discovery. While an ancient pressure plate might have triggered a single stone block to fall, a movie might show an entire hallway crumbling in a chain reaction, a thrilling exaggeration that serves the story. This constant cultural recycling does more than just entertain. It keeps a widespread curiosity about these ancient technologies alive. A teenager playing a game might become fascinated by the real-world history behind a trap they narrowly avoided in a virtual tomb, leading them to seek out documentaries or articles about actual archaeological finds. In some remarkable cases, these fictional representations have even inspired professional researchers to re-examine historical accounts with fresh eyes, asking if a seemingly outlandish legend might have a kernel of engineering truth. Yet this popularization comes with a significant cost. The relentless focus on puzzle solving and treasure hunting often strips these mechanisms of their profound spiritual context. A deadly corridor becomes a level to be beaten, not a sacred boundary designed to test the soul of an initiate. The trap is trivialized into an obstacle, its role as an integral part of a living religious practice forgotten in the chase for a digital reward. This tension between education and entertainment creates a fascinating cultural echo. Our enduring love for these stories reveals a timeless human fascination with the moral and physical challenge of the protected space. It invites you to consider where you first learned about these ideas and how that initial exposure shaped your own perception of the ancient world's cunning and its sacred intentions. Your own computer might be the closest modern equivalent to a trapped temple. The same psychological strategies that protected ancient tombs now defend digital fortresses. Cybersecurity experts deploy honeypots, which are elaborate, fake data servers designed to look like a company's most valuable assets. An attacker, drawn by the tempting facade, spends their energy and reveals their methods trying to breach this digital decoy, all while the real treasure remains safely hidden elsewhere. This is the modern application of cultural misdirection, using a prominent, appealing target to divert attention from the actual vulnerability. Even the physical design of a bank employs these age-old principles. The ornate, decorative grille on the ceiling is not just for show. It perfectly conceals the housing for motion sensors and high-definition cameras. The comforting, familiar aesthetics of the space make you feel secure, while simultaneously masking the very mechanisms that are watching you. The core tactics are identical, exploiting human expectation and using the trusted environment itself as camouflage. This continuity across 3,000 years reveals something fundamental about the human mind. The specific technology evolves from counterweights to code, but the underlying psychology remains constant. We are still vulnerable to having our own assumptions and desires turned against us. This invites a deeply personal reflection. What are the modern traps you navigate every day? They are not made of stone, but of information and influence. The cultural assumptions we absorb without question can function like a false corridor, leading us toward a predetermined conclusion. Our own cognitive biases are the pressure plates of the mind, causing us to make snap judgments based on flawed patterns. The constant stream of misleading information, presented with the comforting familiarity of a trusted news source or social media feed, is the psychological equivalent of a sacred, intoxicating smoke, clouding our perception of reality. These are the architectural deceptions of our time, built not by priests and masons, but by algorithms and influencers. Recognizing this connection does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It provides a powerful lens for understanding your own world. When you feel yourself being funneled toward a specific emotional reaction or a simplistic point of view, you are likely encountering a modern iteration of the ancient trap. The defense is also the same. It requires a questioning mind, a skepticism of surfaces, and the pursuit of hidden knowledge. This timeless relevance bridges the chasm between the ancient and the contemporary, suggesting that the greatest treasure these monuments protect is not gold, but a perpetual lesson in human nature. That lesson now compels us to look forward, to ask what other secrets these silent stones might yet reveal. The sealed chambers of the Great Pyramid hold their breath, waiting. We have mapped its known passages with lasers and muons, but its deepest voids remain a profound architectural secret, places where no modern human has ever set foot. Archaeologists soberly estimate that the vast majority of the world's sacred sites are in a similar state, only partially explored. The reasons are as varied as the sites themselves, from the terrifying structural instability of a Tibetan mountain monastery, where one wrong step could trigger a centuries-old rockfall, to the complex political restrictions that keep entire regions off-limits to researchers. Then there is the simple, humbling fact of technological limitation. Our current tools can only suggest the shapes of hidden rooms, not the delicate, fiendish mechanisms that might be poised within them. This means that the most ingenious deceptions, the ones that relied on a total absence of witnesses, could still be perfectly preserved, their triggers untouched and their counterweights still tensed. The potential for discovery is staggering. Consider the submerged temples of the Mediterranean, where silt and still water might have protected intricate rope and wood mechanisms from decay, leaving them functionally intact for the first time in millennia. Or picture the remote Amazonian structures so thoroughly engulfed by the jungle that their very layout is a mystery, potentially containing trap types based on botanical knowledge we have since forgotten. Each of these sites is a locked box, and we are only now forging the keys. The next generation of non-invasive scanning promises not just to see through stone, but to differentiate materials, potentially revealing the ghostly imprint of a long-rotted wooden lever hidden behind a solid wall or the distinct density of a hollow space behind a seemingly impervious altar. A famous monument you have walked through on a guided tour might, upon such a re-examination, reveal an entire defensive subsystem we never knew existed, a hidden lattice of threats woven into the architecture we thought we understood. This forward-looking perspective ensures that the story of sacred deception is far from over. It is a narrative still being written by the Earth itself, with each new discovery holding the power to rewrite our historical understanding of how ancient cultures balanced devotion with defense, and how far they were willing to go to protect what they held most sacred. The greatest trap of all may be our own assumption that we have already found them. A single stone block discovered out of place in a Mayan ruin can tell a dozen conflicting stories. To the archaeologist, it is a clue to the building's chronology. To the materials scientist, it's unique where patterns suggest it pivoted on a central axis. To the physicist, its weight and dimensions reveal the counterforce needed to move it. Unlocking the true function of a sacred trap demands that all these voices speak as one. Modern research into these deceptions is a symphony of collaboration, where historians pore over ancient texts while engineers run digital simulations, and anthropologists consult sacred oral traditions while craftsmen work with authentic period tools. This interdisciplinary approach is not a luxury. It is the only way to reverse engineer a fragmented puzzle where the instructions have been lost for 1,000 years. The process often begins with a contradiction. A historical account describes a massive stone door that swung open with a gentle push, yet the stone itself, when measured, appears far too heavy for a single person to move. The engineer on the team might suggest a system of hidden counterweights, while the physicist calculates the precise pivot point needed to achieve such an effect. The materials scientist then examines the stone's composition and the wear on its base, searching for microscopic grooves that would confirm this theory. Meanwhile, the anthropologist investigates local myths about singing stones or wind gods, looking for a metaphorical key that might describe a sonic or wind-based trigger. One of the most elegant breakthroughs came from such a collaboration at a Greek temple site. Scholars had long been baffled by descriptions of massive doors that seemed to open for certain rituals. By combining acoustic analysis with mechanical engineering, the research team discovered that the doors were not locked by a bolt, but by a harmonic balance. The immense stone slabs were perfectly counterbalanced, but held in place by a small, precisely tuned bronze pin. Chanting a specific musical note at the correct volume would cause the pin to vibrate at its resonant frequency, eventually shaking it loose and allowing the counterweight to take over, swinging the door open as if by magic. This was not a trap in the lethal sense, but a brilliant deception of access, a lock that responded not to a key but to a song. To test such complex hypotheses, researchers turned to experimental archaeology. They construct scaled-down models using only the tools and materials available to the original builders. There is a profound difference between a theory on paper and the gritty reality of rope, wood, and stone. A mechanism that seems flawless in a computer model might fail because of the inherent friction of a hemp rope on a sandstone channel, a detail only hands-on reconstruction can reveal. These practical experiments force a dialogue with the past, where the materials themselves push back and correct modern assumptions. Of course, this work is bound by strict ethical limits. While a team might build a full-scale model of a non-lethal locking mechanism, they will not reconstruct a volley of iron darts or a collapsing ceiling. The goal is understanding, not reenacting the violence. This methodological diversity reveals a final, profound layer to the story. The sacred traps were not just clever gadgets, they were themselves the products of integrated knowledge systems. The architect who designed one was not merely an engineer, but also a priest who understood ritual acoustics, a stonemason who knew the fracture points of local granite, and a psychologist who could anticipate the fears of an intruder. The collaborative efforts of our modern specialists are, in a way, an attempt to reassemble that one holistic ancient mind, piecing together a lost intelligence from the silent stones it left behind. The silent cunning of ancient stones now finds a voice in the modern museum. Institutions worldwide are building interactive exhibits where you can safely test the principles of these sacred deceptions, pressing a mock pressure plate to see a digital reconstruction of a counterweight system in action. This hands-on approach transforms abstract historical concepts into tangible lessons in physics and engineering. You feel the direct relationship between force, leverage, and motion, understanding intuitively how a small amount of pressure could pivot a massive stone door or release a hidden counterweight. It is education through direct experience, allowing the genius of ancient builders to be appreciated without the mortal risk. This engagement extends far beyond museum walls. University engineering programs have developed sophisticated three-dimensional simulations, enabling students to virtually assemble and disassemble trap mechanisms, testing theories about their operation in a safe digital space. Documentary filmmakers use computer-generated imagery to breathe life into these long-dormant systems, reconstructing entire temples to show how light, sound, and stone worked in concert. This widespread public dissemination does more than just spread knowledge. It fundamentally shifts our appreciation of ancient technological achievement. For centuries, the artistic and spiritual dimensions of these monuments were celebrated, while their function as sophisticated security systems was often dismissed as legend. Now, we recognize the architect as a master engineer and a behavioral psychologist. The challenge for educators lies in presenting this fascinating topic with nuance. How do you explain the lethal purpose of a device without glorifying violence? How do you simplify a complex hydraulic trigger for a young audience without stripping away its cultural and spiritual significance? The most successful programs frame these mechanisms not as weapons, but as profound expressions of a culture's values, reflecting the extreme lengths to which a society would go to protect what it held most sacred. They emphasize the ingenuity and the intellectual triumph, not the destructive outcome. This careful, thoughtful approach ensures that the legacy of these architectural deceptions is not one of fear, but of inspiration. It encourages a new generation of historians, engineers, and artists to look at the ancient world with fresh eyes, seeing the seamless fusion of art and science, of faith and function. Our journey through these halls of sacred stone reveals a single, unifying truth. From the psychological disorientation of a mirrored corridor to the celestial clockwork of a solar temple, every deception was part of a holistic philosophy. Protection was not an afterthought bolted onto a holy space. It was woven into its very essence, integrated into its art, its rituals, and its alignment with the cosmos. These builders understood that the most powerful defenses are those that engage the human mind, exploiting our fears, our beliefs, and our very perception of reality. The true treasure these monuments guarded was not merely gold or jewels, but the sanctity of belief itself, a secret so profound it required an architecture of magnificent, multi-layered lies to keep it safe for eternity. These deceptive monuments ultimately reveal a profound duality, a world where the line between a sanctuary and a fortress was deliberately blurred. Ancient builders did not see a contradiction between spiritual devotion and pragmatic defense, instead weaving them together into a single, brilliant tapestry. The psychological manipulation at the entrance, the mechanical cunning in the statues, the weaponization of light and sound, all of it served a unified purpose: to guard the sacred from profane hands. This integration shows a level of sophistication that challenges our modern assumptions, forcing us to see these cultures not as primitive, but as masters of a holistic art where engineering was a form of prayer and architecture was a language of power. The next time you stand before an ancient temple or an old cathedral, let your gaze linger a little longer. Look past the serene facade and consider the silent stones. That worn step, that oddly placed carving, that strangely echoing corner. Each could be a fragment of a vast, dormant puzzle. The true legacy of these spaces is not just in the prayers they housed, but in the profound, layered intelligence they represent, a testament to the timeless human need to protect what we hold most dear, using every ounce of our creativity and cunning. The greatest secret these monuments keep is not a hidden treasure, but the enduring reminder of our own complex nature, forever suspended between the divine and the deceptive.